I've done a lot with authentic or attempting authentic assessment, but what I found with Module 4 is taking it to that final piece. I had mentioned in my Flipgrid response that is there really authenticity in a school setting? You know, because we're talking about this is an assignment, students have to show what they know on it. So let me put it in this context and it'll kind of seem real. But what I'm finding is with going through Module 4 and reading the different chapters from the books, it really does help with student learning, even if it's an artificial authenticity, if that makes sense.
Yes, I had commented, Chris, on what you had put in there, and I really resonated with it because I came up with the term FOW authenticity, where you kind of wrap a school assignment around, oh, pretend you're doing this, and
right.
And I was a little bit negative, but maybe that's not so bad. Pat kind of directed me when she responded to yours to say, maybe that's not such a bad thing.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think what you're looking for, and I think the speaker in the movie that we looked at talked about, you provide like that real world feeling, that little cosmos right wherever you are, and as long as you have that. But I thought it was an interesting discussion to have. My aha was more on, I really had to think a little bit about the idea of producing information and the research paper, that one question that we had, what was not an authentic assessment? And I'm thinking, well, you produce the research paper, but then when you think about it a little deeper, you really are just regurgitating information. You're not creating anything. So that was really big for me. And the fact that I had to think about that for a little while to really get it.
Very good.
Yeah, I kind of took my aha moment to I zeroed it in on something that I just was thinking about today. And Tom, this kind of goes back to our kind of comment, discussion on my document here with the authentic context and tasks. I think I'm so used to thinking about scaffolding as a part of like what's necessary, because when I work with these students who are learning English, that's kind of the first part that pops into my mind. And so it was kind of an aha to me to realize that, those scaffold pieces are really nice and they help them access the content and be able to participate in the task. But those aren't the things that really are required for them to demonstrate mastery for the objective. So that was really helpful. It was kind of a moment of clarity when I realized that. So that was helpful.
And Andrea, I liked how you talked about the inquiry approach, where you were having your students come up with the questions, kind of building in the authenticity from the start. And I thought that was really good. And I think the idea, too, that you can have traditional assessment. It's maybe a combination of the two that gives you a clearer picture. Like written assessment is still all right to have if it's the best way to assess what students are learning. So I thought that was very good. And we're going to be doing an authenticity checklist, I know. But like you, Tom, the idea of it took me back where you have to be so clear with your objectives, and you can tell you're not clear when students keep asking you what you have to, what are we supposed to do? What am I doing? What am I doing? I just love that, because who hasn't been in that situation?
I think too, Tom, you had mentioned at one point that all of the steps of this process are so interrelated. It's like when I started to kind of develop my the tasks that I wanted students to do in this last assignment, it made me want to go back to my learning progression and kind of tweak that a little bit, because I was like, oh, maybe it would be better or more clear for students to go about it from this angle. And, especially since I'm doing mine on a task that I haven't taught before. I'm using a new subject that I'm just starting to teach this year. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, like I say, I was just blown away with my learning. I learn all the time from you. But this module was really, I had so many eye-openers when it came to what I thought this module was about, and now I think it's about something completely different, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. I think that's why I chose this out of everything, because it really was about creating things, and I was just drawn to the topic when we were first choosing them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and as I think about this, we've done some differentiation training with Dr. Richard Cash. He comes into the district and talks to all of the teachers as we've moved from HP to S plus at the secondary level. And he talks about authentic tasks in that in an English classroom, students aren't just writing. They're poets, they're journalists, they're essayists. And so by putting it in that context, then the students have more ownership of what they're doing. And so you're asking students to rewrite the end of Romeo and Juliet. Well, now you're a dramatist. You are a playwright. And so that's also part of it, is adopting those roles.
That's a cool way to put it. I like that.
Mm-hmm. It's really about being. You know, you actually are what you're doing.
Yep.
Nice, Chris. Nice.
So looking at our list here, and obviously we could, add many more things to it as we go on. Any one of these, anybody want to speak as being a real key, like maybe the most important thing about authenticity?
Maybe the top one relates to real life for students.
Okay. And I know, Andrea, you talked a lot about that in your post with me about how you make how do you make your tasks more real life? Or is it a function of being an EL teacher?
Well, I think that the more authentic that you can make the learning for any student, it just becomes so much more relevant, because then they can directly see where they're going to apply what they're learning and can think of other examples that they may have already experienced in their real life. And so it just, I think, is advantageous all around. I'm trying to think of any specific examples I may have mentioned with you. Can you think of any?
Well, you mentioned that oftentimes at the end of an assignment, you'll have students then go teach what they learned to other students. And I think that's very authentic in an educational institution, that we are all teachers, that we have that responsibility.
Yeah, they really enjoy it. And it's fun because then, they see the younger students in the hallway, and the younger students are, point to them and say, he taught me about, mammals, or whatever the topic was. And it's cool. They get to be like local celebrities.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good for them, Andrea. I really like that too. I think that's a wonderful experience, for both. It helps both, the quote teacher and the learner. I thought that was real good and really demonstrates mastery. If you can teach it, then you know what you're doing.
That's kind of what I tell them.
Yeah. And I think if we can relate it to real life, and give them that context, I think it's going to eliminate the, well, why do I have to learn this? Why, how in any way, shape, or form is this going to help me? Well, you are a carpenter and you are building a house. How much wood do you need to build this garage? And giving that context, okay, well, what kind of math do I have to do? That's way over my head. But what kind of math do you have to do in order to accomplish building a garage? So...
yeah, you really have to have the hook to get them in.
Yes.
So you need that. You have to do that.
I remember one of my junior high school math teachers growing up had a poster on the wall that said, when am I ever going to have to use this? And it was all these examples from the real world of where you'll use specific kinds of math. And I remember anytime any kid would be like, well, when am I ever going to have to use this? She'd just point to the poster. Go check it out.
That's a good poster. It's a good poster to have at home even.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Now, Pat, I really like the way in your example you had that. I thought it was about social issues or not? Nonviolence.
Really, yes.
And you said how part of the assignment was they had to take that home and talk about what nonviolence looks like in the home. And that really blew me away, because I'm thinking, I don't know if I would have naturally went to that level, but I thought, well, how authentic is that?
Well, actually, when we were researching, and this was very interesting, I do a lot with a friend of mine who teaches down in Virginia Beach, and there's a Richmond Peace Center when we were looking for outside agencies, and they had a program where you could go there, but they also had something in languages, all the world languages, they had this family pledge of nonviolence. And when you think about it, just within homes, siblings, how they get along, the language that we use to talk to each other isn't always the best in families. And it was a way to get the families involved. And so they really did that, and that was really good. And they were displayed after the family signed this pledge. They made a wall display within the school, which was really
cool.
very nice. Yeah,
That's very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Those things are
that
cool
was really
too,
good.
Pat, because it seems like those conversations can be the beginning of something really great, not only in school, but then also for those families. So that's a really cool. It's a cool project.
It transfers over to life. We found that same excitement when they were using Digo. The first thing we introduced them to for this project was social bookmarking, and you can use that to network and share your bookmarks and things like that. And they started right away, I'll use it with the hobbies that I do and things like that. So they really took to those kinds of things. If it's meaningful to them, they'll take it and run with it. So
Andrea, I think it's interesting what you just put down about group work as authentic learning. One of the things that is interesting just about the course we're doing right now in general is the independent work versus the group work. I haven't done my assignment for Module 4 yet. I haven't turned that in. I know it's late. But
You're in trouble. You're in trouble, Chris.
But I wanted to go through this process in this discussion before I turned it in. I did the same thing with the previous assignment. I waited. I needed a little bit more feedback. I needed some more information from the group. One, to make sure I was doing the work correctly, but using other people's brains to help make my work better. And that's very true for students. And as we move these, who knows what jobs these kids will have 10, 15 years from now, but even if they're sitting alone in their little office with Johnny Depp over their shoulder, they're going to be visiting like this.
Or is it,
hypothetically,
as I said, I thought it was Conan.
Conan Schmonan, Johnny Depp.
I apologize.
So it is. It's no, it's all right.
Yeah, you're both making the point. We really work collaboratively. Nobody does work alone. Even if you'd work alone, you're working on a piece of something.
Right.
Your piece relates to somebody else, so you're both right on with that. That is really important. And just the skills of how to do that.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, too. And it's interesting because I think with some of the new initiatives that at least our district has been piloting this year and last year, I've heard a couple different times that group work is more discouraged now than encouraged, and because of grading purposes and wanting to make sure that each student really earns their grade. But it's true that really group work is real world, and students will find that time and time again, in various different contexts when they're in school and when they're out of school. So I think it really is authentic.
And I think it speaks more to the problem of assessment than it does to the group work.
Sure, absolutely.
That's what we have trouble doing.
Of course, she applies it to herself. But if we wanted to look at that task, and that was in Module 4, and this was drawn from Popham's work from his book, Transformative Assessment. So I claim no authenticity here. It's all from him. But so the
disclaimer.
idea was,
Yes.
What my thinking was we would look at, I'll switch over to this view for the broadcast purposes, that we would, it's maybe a good time to have this because of exactly what you were just saying. At what point do we have the discussion about our kids doing something that's meaningful that we're assessing? Or if we skip that discussion, does it just become really schoolwork, and does it become very traditional assessment because we never have the discussion? And so as we did this, I came more and more to the decision that kind of what I was doing with this was kind of creating the summative assessment, the end product that I would want to see students be able to do. And so I didn't use the term summative assessment, but I think maybe that's what I had done. And so I have mine here posted, where I have the curricular aim and then the authentic context. And my question was this documentary or film, was that a little bit too fakey of a context? And then the tasks, which I took from Popham's presentation. Actually, no, that came from Chappius and Archer. They're really good book on rubrics. And then something I added, which wasn't in the original, was I kind of just had this a statement down here, where this would be like a statement of what students would do for me to know that they had mastered it. So you will state the explicit main ideas of a nonfiction text and cite 3 items from the text that support your statement. You will present the explicit main ideas and textual support visually to an audience of your peers. And that's where I was thinking maybe what I'm really getting at is the summative assessment. So if they can do this, they have mastered what I had originally stated as the objective. So that's, if you would have asked me at the beginning of the module, you know, what is this thing all about, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that. Yeah. That's kind of how I've grown to understand it, and I don't know that that's right, but that's kind of my example.
Tom, if I could just speak to what you just said, because I think it's very important. When you were talking about the summative assessment part of this, I remember being struck too by the fact that when you are designing this, you're starting with the end in mind, which is exactly what you said that you did. You thought about what you wanted the students to know at the end. And the other part of this that's really important is I think the best assessment is really kind of reflective over time. And I think you touched on that too. So I think they were really key points that you just shared. So thank you. That's and I think, you know, your understanding is great with that, because that's what I got out of it, you know.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's the right understanding, but as I came up with that statement, I looked at it and said, you know what, that looks like a summative assessment. That's what the product I would need to see students produce, and I can say, yes, you get it. You are able to do that.
You know, when I did mine, I kind of came up with the same conclusion, that the tasks that I was creating kind of led to, this is a summative assessment. And I'm wondering, you know, is it realistic to then break down every objective and kind of go through this process up to this authentic tasks part, or is this mostly for summative assessments? What do you think?
Well, I'll throw it out to the group of experts. What does Chris and Pat think about that? And, you know, is that a problematic thing? Is it a good thing? What do you guys think?
I got sidetracked. I'm looking at the document, and I'm thinking about authentic context, and so I got distracted from what you were talking about as I was thinking about authentic context, where in your example, Tom, you put presenting the main ideas for a documentary or film based on the nonfiction text. So that's the context. We are screenwriters, and we are pitching our idea to a film company. Would that be what you were trying to get at with the authentic context? Because I guess that's where I'm still struggling. Because as I look at, there's some, I'm guessing, are these Andrea's and Pat's examples or assignments?
Yes,
okay.
The next one is
later.
mine.
Okay.
Yeah. Andrea's is much better. I was up half the night with a sinus headache, and I said, "Oh no, not today."
Okay, and so again, I'm looking at authentic context.
And I think, Chris, you seem to me, if I can paraphrase what I'm hearing you
say, do.
You're really trying to establish the background against which all of these tasks are happening.
Right.
You know, I mean, context can be taken as that too. So I think that's what you're trying to see with that, and I guess asking if that's how Tom was seeing it, because we talked about, like when our talk, I had the kids recreate a replica of an ancient Chinese dynasty. Well, I, could have said that, pretending to be artists or something. That's
Right.
what they would be doing. It's just not stated, but maybe implied. But I guess,
Okay.
do you really want to see it there so that you understand? To you, the context is really important. It seems like that's the most important thing before you do anything else.
Yeah, so
Is
I'll
that
look
right?
at that, and I like what Chris is saying, because
Yep.
when I actually made this this template probably a month or two ago when we did the original work with CIES, and so that was my thinking, Chris, was okay. I want to put it in the context of something outside of school.
Right.
And then as I got deeper into this, I said, and I really started thinking about the authenticity of a process. Like you had said, when you are a poet, you are doing things a real poet does.
Right.
You're doing things. So if I look now at that description at the bottom, that certainly could be in the context of a documentary or film, because I think that's what probably people who are pitching ideas would have to do. They'd have to understand the main ideas of what they're talking about, and they'd have to present that to somebody else. So
Right.
the authentic context as originally listed, I think, was kind of weak, but now looking at it, I think, well, that could be a documentary or film, or it could be presented in a lot of different ways. You're really pitching an idea. So
Right.
I think it's stronger now than it was originally without that statement at the bottom.
And Chris, I think that is a great way to frame it. I mean, I think in order to really gain student buy-in and set the stage, they have to kind of have this mindset of, well, why would I be doing this? And giving them that information really helps them kind of almost assume the part, right? So that they can get into the right mindset. So I think that'd be valuable.
And that's what I was thinking. And again, it goes with the differentiation training that I had with Richard Cash. Again, going back to, you aren't just a mathematician, you're a carpenter. Or in science, you are you're a nuclear physicist. And setting up the parameters that way, which is why, as I'm looking at the examples, and again, that was just my mindset, and I guess I'm looking for confirmation, is my mindset an okay mindset? And I'm hearing that it is, so I'm good. And
You're
I totally
among friends.
sidetracked you. I know, and I totally sidetracked you from your question about authentic assessment and whether these are actually summatives or not. So
that's okay. I want to say one more thing about.
Yep.
I want to say one more thing about your question about the context thing. I wonder too, like, for me, I always find that I tend to write things in I'll write them first kind of how I understand them, and then I'll kind of turn them into student-friendly language. And I almost wonder, like, maybe that could be included in this authentic context column, because I always am like, hey, why make more work for myself later? I want to write right here what I'm going to say to the students so that I've got it kind of fresh in my mind. And I think, setting that out ahead of time and having it right in that authentic context area could be really great.
Mm-hmm. And more meaningful for you. So
Sure,
it makes
yeah.
more sense, for you to do it that way.
But isn't that what we did with the learning progressions, though? Because that's kind of what I did with my learning progressions, is I put the standard information in more kid-friendly language. So are we kind of blending them?
I don't know. What do you guys think? How does this look? How does this fit into this into the learning progression that we just left?
I think they're very related.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought this dovetailed nicely into that and was an extension of that. So I think those parts you could incorporate, like Chris is saying, because I liked how they took everything apart.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And Chris, to answer your question, I think what I discovered by building this was something that I think could be what I would want them to be able to do as a result of learning it, which therefore could be a summative. And so I don't know if it's important or not to label it a summative. Maybe the module should be developing a summative assessment. I mean, maybe that would work better, because I think that's what I eventually did after this process.
Yeah,
Yeah, me too.
I think if you're involved in like more project-based learning, passion-based learning, inquiry approach, and things like that, I think you would take your major goals and break them down. Like we were saying, when would you do this, or when would you would you do this for everything? And I don't think you would, but I think it would be for the major outcomes of your project.
That makes sense.
I can see that.
Yeah.
So I think it fits in with there, and
yeah, because now that I'm looking at it, if I were to just take that curricular aim and assess that, it would probably be very individualistic. I could assess it through, here's a piece of paper, and write down what you got from that book, which would be very deadly dull. And now, maybe because of thinking this through and thinking of authentic tasks, now it's something that could be a lot richer if I chose. So I just can't tell you how much I'm learning from just every second I do this. I'm learning more and more and more. I'm a really bad teacher because I'm just learning everything with you.
No, that's a part of the inquiry
No, you're
process.
a co-learner. That's what you said. You're
Well,
a co-learner.
In this case, entirely a co-learner.
yeah.
So
And I'm probably sure if you're in Andrea's class, you're even setting, they probably do the rubrics and how they would evaluate themselves, or what they're going to do to demonstrate it. So I think it's something you can even involve the students in. There's no reason they couldn't be, creating this.
Totally.
I think you're absolutely right.
If you take it, that far.
Yeah. So if we want to, I have Pat's up now on the screen.
Yeah, mine, it's not real good, but it's all right. The one thing I did not see, Tom, and I apologize for this, I never saw a description of authentic assessment box.
You didn't see
I guess
that
because
I just added that today.
Oh, you didn't. Well, you know what's funny, though? I did check the document. The links. It was the links I checked. Okay. Because I thought, I missed that. But then I did scroll down. Andrea missed it, too.
I missed it.
Hey, at least you have something to look at.
Yeah, I do think that's good.
That's one thing about being a co-learner. That means I can, recreate the assignments whenever I
Add
need
things
to.
at a moment's notice.
And Chris is just smiling. She's saying, "I'm so glad I waited."
Yes, right. There you go, Chris.
Yes. Score one for me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could look at, Pat, we could kind of work through yours together, and maybe do we want to try to co-create what that authentic assessment might look like based on your curricular aim and the tasks and stuff like that? We can all get into the document. So what I like to do every time we meet online is kind of let everybody in the room, excluding me, kind of go at it and say, okay, you are a team. And let's say you're all together. You're going to have to teach this curricular aim that Pat has. Let's assume you've all created it. So how might you describe that ultimate authentic assessment given the context and the tasks? How might you write that out?
Pat, do you want to walk us through the curricular aim? You want to just talk us through it?
Yeah, okay. This was overall, it was identifying major characteristics of ancient cultures. So, and this was something we had actually done. Students will choose one of the ancient dynasties of China, research and create a replica of an artifact representing their dynasty using art materials of their choosing. They also contributed to a wiki and did a lot more, so there was a lot more involved, but this was just one piece of it, and I picked it because it really was creation. So the context, and I see now probably it could be, and it was done together with the art teacher, so you know, it could be in our art studio, you'll create a replica of an artifact representative of an ancient Chinese dynasty. And for the authentic tasks, it was social studies, art, and technology. The knowledge that they used was their research about ancient Chinese dynasties. What product was created, a replica of an artifact representing an ancient Chinese dynasty. What resources It was art materials, whatever they wanted to do. Some of them made clay pots. Some of them made kites. So there was a lot of different things, and the timeline was 3 to 5 days.
You know, one context that comes to mind would be museums do this all the time when they put together exhibits.
Good
so
one.
that
Okay, that would be wonderful.
yeah,
You
like
know, preparing for an exhibit at
A curator.
You know,
You're a
yeah.
museum
Good
curator.
museum curator.
Can we add that in?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it, Pat. I see your cursor. Go for it.
We'll create. You could even say, I mean, you will create and prepare for display. Let's throw that in there because that's what they would do too.
On the wiki, did they kind of write up a description of the artifact?
They didn't do that. They really just wrote more about the dynasty with the philosophy and education, the emperors and things like that. It was more pictures. They
provided some background, it sounds like. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that really was nice.
So I'm looking at your authentic task, and I see what knowledge is used, and it says student research. Do you know more, Pat? Like what specifically? Like did they have to? I'm trying to think of some of the Bloom's verbs. Were they understanding something? Were they analyzing something? I mean, do you remember?
I would say
probably evaluate, wouldn't they? Need to evaluate in order to decide what they're going to replicate?
Well, they would first have to know what the artifacts were.
So maybe identify first?
Yeah.
And that would probably be in the learning progression, I would imagine. You know, those steps that would take you to being able to do the... Because when I look at the curricular aim, the curricular aim almost looks like more of a description of kind of the end product, you know, or kind of like the task they're going to do at the end. And so that's my question is like, okay, so what knowledge or skill is being called out? Like what is the standard they're being assessed on? What are they supposed to master as a result of doing this,
the actual
work?
Standard that I used, which this was a private school, so they're a little different. I didn't go deeper. The actual standard was just generally identify major characteristics of ancient cultures.
Okay, so so probably where
we could say
knowledge used, maybe it's a recognition of, because if they're identifying, they're probably just recognizing, I'm guessing.
Okay.
So I'm looking at the wording in both Tom and Andrea's curricular aim, which is from the learning progression. The if the student can ... they have mastered the learning objective.
That. Right.
Could it be reworded that way? So if the student can identify and replicate, well, if the student can identify major characteristics.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right. If the student can do the replication.
Yeah, I saw that different
major
wording.
Characteristics of ancient cultures.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a replica if it didn't have those characteristics in it.
Right.
So identify and replicate an artifact that demonstrates major characteristics, or how do we want to word that?
Yeah, I think that would be good. I think that was good, and the reason I said replicate too, because I hated to keep saying replicate an artifact, but that's what you got to do.
How about if the student can identify and replicate a major characteristic, or I'm thinking in an artifact.
Just leave it general.
Can they identify and replicate a major characteristic in an artifact? Characteristic of an ancient culture in an artifact.
Yeah, and then we could get rid of the if.
Does that make sense?
There. We could just say the student. Yeah, if we got rid of the if, it would just be the student can identify and replicate.
Great.
Like an I can.
Well, I was just thinking. Yep, because, well, the language for the others are that they have mastered the
Yeah.
learning objective.
Yeah.
So,
Yep, we could add that at the end. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. Okay, I hear what you're saying. So we could keep the if in there.
Okay.
And I'll write at the end to demonstrate mastery or something.
Right.
Yep. There we go.
Okay. Does that make sense, Pat? How we kind
Yes,
of?
it does. Yes, it does. And I could see that, and I thought, oh, you know, that's why I was going to say jump to Andrea's, because you know,
No
hers
way.
is
You're
much
not-
more detailed.
You're not
and,
off the hook, Pat.
You
You're
know,
not off the
to
hook.
be off the hook, but to save, to either save time or this will be a good learning experience then too. So, you know, and
I'm
and
learning
this really
lots.
is worthwhile. So.
I'm learning lots.
Yeah,
I know.
well, me too, Chris. Just from viewing the examples, you know,
But
you do learn a lot like that.
Really, what we're doing is we're giving Chris more reason to procrastinate.
Next time I'm gonna
No, it'll be done once we're done with this.
Oh, I know. I'm only kidding.
No, I know.
share
Yeah.
yours, Chris, because then we'll want to see it. It'll be the best
Okay.
one.
Yes,
no, I don't
definitely.
think so.
So okay, so great. We now know what it is. You know, where they have to
Right,
identify and
so
replicate,
just-
and they're doing it like a museum curator.
Right.
So and we know the knowledge is at recognition, identify. And they're going to create the replica. And so what? And resources, internet access, art materials. Okay. Do we think we have everything we need to do the to do that statement? Or
For
do you guys
the
think we need more?
what knowledge is for what the what knowledge is
Okay.
used? Should that be students recognize and identify major characteristics?
Oh yeah, I think you're right.
Because they're
Okay.
not recognizing and identifying an artifact. So that should just be instead of an artifact. Yep. Students recognize and identify major characteristics of ancient Chinese dynasties. And I want to throw ancient Chinese secrets in there, but that's a Calgon commercial.
Yeah, we're kind of dating ourselves on that one.
Sorry.
Good parallel structure.
Yeah, yeah.
Right
I
when
like
you
it.
said that, I was about to jump in. I said, no, that'd be culturally insensitive. So I left it up to Chris.
It would be. Sorry.
Students recognize and identify a major characteristic of an ancient Chinese dynasty.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we can get rid of everything else.
Well, no, you want to
Okay.
keep the
Okay, now what's the performance? That's next thing. Product.
what product or performance is created.
Okay, what? Okay.
Yep.
Thank
and
you.
And this is a product they're creating.
Yep.
What product is created? And let's bold that. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I thought one thing Chappius and Artier brought up about assessment was the idea of making sure every student has access to the same resources.
Right.
And I know sometimes I don't know how many times I've had students do projects and they did an iMovie at home,
Mm-hmm.
and then there were other students in class that had to struggle through some other technology like
Poster.
Windows Playmaker.
Yeah, knowing
Or a poster.
that is really important. Now,
Yeah,
we
and
were
I
lucky.
thought-
Where I am, they have 2 computer labs, and the kids have everything. The older grades are bringing their own devices to school, so that wasn't an issue. But
Yeah.
the other thing is, too, that when you give students choice in what they're going to create, you really have to make sure that some of the same skills are used for when you go to evaluate their creations. That was another issue that I thought was interesting. You have
Yeah.
to make sure that the skills are relatively the same in whatever's being produced if they have choice.
Sure. So
I
kind of make
thought
sure.
that, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you kind
Yeah.
of make sure that you lay out the objectives really clearly so that it's really the same skill across the board no matter what
Right.
product it is. That's a good point.
And usually, if it was digital tools, we would kind of specify the digital tools. But with this, it was really just what they wanted to create. So I guess we have to do the description of authentic assessment. And I'm looking at, okay, I guess we could say basically
So it kind of takes that.
Yeah, the students will choose one of the ancient dynasties of China, research and create a replica. That whole sentence, would that be the description?
Yeah,
Or
I know what Stiggins did in his examples. He started with the resources. I think he said, given these things, and his example was given a stopwatch,
okay,
and then they had to do their science
so
thing.
okay, so using
art materials.
various art
Yeah.
materials.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's asking me to. It comes up. Sometimes I can't edit it, and then it says you just have to refresh the page.
No
Now
problem.
I'm using Firefox, but
I can get in there. So go ahead and tell me, using
various art materials.
Okay.
Using various art materials, students will research and create one replica of an artifact representative of an ancient Chinese dynasty. Now, I guess the only thing that we don't have up there too was, I guess that's good enough. The only thing that comes to mind is that maybe we would have had some kind of display of these artifacts. They would have been like what you were saying, Andrea, with a little background information, maybe, like tagging them, Chris, as a curator does. You label them,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe, I can always go back and put this in, but maybe part of the other thing they would have had to do, they would have had to label their artifact with a brief description.
Sure.
And then
Yeah,
these
that'd be
would have
cool.
displayed somewhere else,
Mhm.
You know
and
what'd be
that
cool?
would be nice.
Here's cool. A QR code to the wiki.
Oh, yes.
Love it.
Definitely.
Love it.
QR code to the wiki.
Yeah, definitely.
Love it.
Okay. Put that in there. And that
I've
would be
seen that
cool.
at the zoo.
Yeah. Well, they have done that in the hallways. They're pretty techy. They have put those in the hallways for similar things like that, the QR codes throughout the hallways that the kids could do. So
Now
that's
it's
really good. Now
One thing-
it's together.
One thing that's interesting, Pat, and I think Andrea, we had this discussion today. If you look at your resources, there's internet access is not a resource, and so my question would be, okay, so is internet access really part of what I was trying to teach? If I'm trying to get them to identify and replicate a major characteristic, I'm thinking it's good that it's left out, because I don't think it has anything to do with demonstrating that I can identify and replicate. Maybe that was something that occurred in the learning progression. Maybe that was part of maybe that was a building block to be able to replicate and identify, was the research part. So I think what's kind of nice about these descriptions is you're leaving out maybe what's not really essential. So you don't have a big laundry list of you have to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, when really, no, you just have to do this one thing. You have to identify and replicate a major characteristic. That's it. That shows you master it. What do you guys think about that in terms of excluding some things that maybe are important but not essential?
I think that makes
In
sense.
other words, you're assuming that internet access is available.
Well,
You're assuming that some
Or they've
things
already done it.
or had
Or
it.
they've already done
Yeah.
it.
Oh, okay.
So for if I look at your description, it does say students will research and create. Although that's interesting, because if we look at our curricular aim, is research part of that?
Well, identify. I mean,
It's almost kind of implied, right?
right.
Yeah. I think it's definitely a building block. But it's interesting that in our authentic assessment we have research included, but it's not in the actual curricular aim. It's being able to identify and replicate. So,
Okay, so we can take that out.
You could. I'm just, and I'm not saying what you have to do or not, but it's just really interesting when what I've learned through this process is oftentimes things will find their way in later on, and I'm like, why is that there?
So, like,
That
do you think that, like, as we were kind of writing out the description of authentic assessment, as kind of that beginning of the sentence says, using various art materials, and I almost wanted to add in, you know, right here before the comma, something about, and knowledge of ancient Chinese dynasties. I mean, is that something that we would include, or is that kind of...
Doesn't that come in under what knowledge is used? Isn't that where it's implied? Is that they've done
Yeah.
research? So
Sure,
under
yeah,
the
that's
what
probably
knowledge
true.
is used, research of ancient Chinese dynasties. So that's the
Yeah.
knowledge.
But
Good
I'm
point.
thinking this description really should be a complete one. I think it. I would tend to go along with Andrea only because I think if you're going to give a description of the authentic assessment, I think it should include everything that I think it should be real specific. So I think I would include it. That would be my own personal feeling because of saying it's a description of the authentic assessment. So you really do want to describe it so that you covered everything. As much as you know, that gentleman did with his example. That was pretty wordy, you know, where you would take the you know, the one that you used about
the stopwatch and all
yes,
that.
you
Yeah.
using the stopwatch and doing it. You know, you didn't have to say more than that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Well,
that was pretty complete. But I really think it's a personal kind of
well,
thing.
and I want to point out
myself.
the fact. I just want to point out the fact that wouldn't this be powerful if every teacher PLC group could have this kind of conversation that we're having now? Because really, this is getting at the essence of common assessment. So, you know, if we were really teaching this, you know, Pat, if I disagreed with you, we'd really have to sit down and say, no, we have to come to an agreement of what we
Yeah,
are asking
exactly.
kids to do. And this is before any instruction takes place. And I
Right.
don't know that we do this much. I know I didn't, unfortunately. It was kind of like, I got to have something ready in 10 minutes and
Right.
this is it. You know, there
Yeah.
was no discussion with anybody else around me. I just had to make it work on my own. So this is an awesome discussion. And I'm not going to agree or disagree with you, Pat, because the discussion is the important thing here.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I think these Hangouts are really valuable. It's a cool tool, a cool resource.
Yeah, it really is, because mine is done.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've
Well-
been kind of quiet lately, Chris. I've noticed that.
I think it really points to the fact, though, of how much when you're trying to do this alone, it's not going to be as good as when you have input from other people. So
Absolutely.
I think that's, yeah.
Absolutely. It can't be. It just can't be. But yet we know sometimes we do have to do things in isolation because
Yeah.
things have to get done when you have 30
Right.
kids sitting in a room and so.
Right.
Right, but just being able to have this conversation, you know, I'm working on something for my mythology unit that we start in March, and getting some ideas from what Pat just posted and everything, I'm taking it to another level that it wasn't last year or the year before or the year before that. So
That's really cool.
that's where the power of this comes in. So
Yeah.
Now I'm looking at the time, and we've gone way over our allotted 45 minutes, although it's kind of interesting, you know, the first couple Hangouts, we really had to push it to get to 45, and the last two, it's been like, we need more time. I'm certainly willing to hang out and hang in. If Andrea, do we want to look at Andrea's, or is
Oh,
everybody-
yes, we must.
yes, we have to.
We
Okay,
must.
sure, that's fine.
No, because she really, you know, was very detailed. And I looked at it. I glanced at it. I really didn't get a chance to look at it.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I can always learn more.
Well, we'll go to Andrea's then. So
Okay,
Andrea, you
we'll
want to
be
walk
quick about
us? Do you want to walk us through what you have here? And I'll
Sure.
scroll because yours is a little bit big, so I'll just scroll as you talk about it.
Okay, sure, no problem. So the curricular aim or the objective is students are going to be describing positive and negative ways that World War II impacted the lives of people on the home front in Minnesota. And so I guess that is translated into this statement down below. If the student can write or speak about 3 positive and 3 negative impacts of the war on people on the home front in Minnesota, they have mastered the learning objective. So then the context, and this is where I'd like to add, Chris, help me out with some good ideas on this. Participate in a debate about the positive and negative impacts of World War II on the home front in Minnesota.
Yeah. Do you want to do it in ours? Yeah.
It's History Day, and you know what? Yeah, no, it's History Day, and veterans from the local VFW are coming to listen to your presentation.
That's good. That's good. I was even thinking like you're talking with your family over Thanksgiving. I don't know. I kept kind of coming back to where would people have debates?
Yeah. No, and I think what this brings to mind is what Pat had said earlier. This might be where I would maybe want to open it up to students. So rather than me try to think of the context, they might come up with all kinds of really interesting ones.
I'm going to step away for
they would have relatives.
I'm going to step away for just a minute. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Right. Yeah. I think they would have a lot of relatives. There's a few people left from World War II, aren't they? Or are they really too old now? I know some of them, but there may be some from World War II that are still around. This would be a very personal thing, I think.
Well, and
project.
The students have, connections to more recent wars, and I think, being able to agree and disagree and list positive and negative impacts could be a skill they might be able to transfer to those discussions also.
Yeah.
And what's interesting now is listening to the radio today, and with is it the Civil War? Is it the 150th? Is that kind of what we're celebrating with that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so there's all kinds of this impact on a war that was even longer ago, and they're talking exactly this curricular aim.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, really. I mean, they're talking about the they're focusing mainly on Lincoln and some of the decisions with.
Yeah.
So
Gettysburg here in Pennsylvania, they're expecting a lot of tourists this year.
Oh, sure.
I bet.
Because of that, yeah.
Okay, so should we go on to the authentic tasks?
Sure.
Okay, so under what knowledge is used, I said statement of at least 3 positive and or negative impacts of World War II on the home front in Minnesota. And the product or performance created will be a debate between classmates about whether World War II had a positive or negative impact on the home front in Minnesota. Resources, and this is where I had some trouble because I kept kind of going back to my learning progression and wanting to include more and more things here. But I tried to weed them out, so we'll see. So I said nonfiction texts on World War II in the home front, T-chart graphic organizer to take notes, and I realized later that's probably better listed as an optional support. Video clips of a presidential and a student debate to provide knowledge of debate structure and language for agreeing and disagreeing, and a post-debate reflection sheet. And then my timeline was 5 days. Looking at those resources, though, now, if I ask myself, what am I really going to need in order to assess this objective, I'd say it's really just the debate itself and then the reflection sheet.
Oh, okay.
But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean,
Just ask.
the debate, I think the debate is really important because how else, what authentic way would you write or speak about these things? I mean, you're not going to do it in a paper.
Right.
There's got to be an audience. So.
Right.
But then the question would be, do you assess their debate skills? And I don't think that's being called for in the curricular aim.
No, it's more just the ability to kind of remember those positive and negative impacts.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Chris?
I was just saying it was the impacts, not the debate skills.
So I almost need like a... Okay, I'm going to strike through these things because I'm deciding that these are actually more part of my learning progression than they are a part of what I'll be assessing.
Yeah, it's interesting because what resources do they need for that debate?
So I wonder if that word resources kind of was misleading for me. I was kind of maybe interpreting it as for this in order to build up to this summative assessment, what kind of resources would I need instead of...
Yeah, I looked on it the same way, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, let's say resources for the actual debate, they probably would be allowed to have some sort of notes. Yeah, I see you typing that in. I mean, you wouldn't expect them to have it memorized, I don't think.
No.
So that would be they'd be able to carry in some resource notes. That would probably
Absolutely. And that would be what I would look at to assess, because I do want to make sure that they have kind of covered both sides, positive and negative. And then I want to look at their reflection. Yeah, I think that sums it up.
So should we go ahead and try to tackle the description of this authentic assessment?
So your timeline, though, will your timeline change? Because they're not going to need 5 days. And I noticed that with Pat's also. Are they going to need 3 to 5 days to create? Because we took out the part about the research and the learning progression part. So are they going to need 5 days?
No, but I'd probably say 2 to 3 if things had to dry. Or you had to dry and then...
So this is really the timeline for assessment. And in that case, I would take out the note-taking and the discussion of the structure, and I would just leave 1 day to have the debate and 1 day to reflect. So I think I'd change that down to 2 days.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing you guys are helping me understand too. That really the timeline is that we're just talking about this task. This, really, if we call it a summative or whatever we want to call it, we're not talking about the entire learning progression or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a helpful distinction to make, because I think that's where I started to kind of meld my learning progression and this authentic task.
Yeah.
Right, and I'd almost take out, Andrea, because you added timeline for summative assessment. It's under the task specifics heading, so you really don't need that. So you really should just be what's your timeline for the task.
There you go.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Good. All right. So should we try to tackle the description down there?
Sure.
Okay, so I like how we started Pat's with using. So in this case, using notes, right? Using notes about the positive and negative impacts of World War II on the Minnesota home front. And do I include the reflection sheet here? What do you think?
Stiggins put that at the end of his, and I think I kind of modeled mine after that. So I kind of stated the knowledge, and then the main task, and then kind of added it. So if that works for you, that might be an approach you could take.
Sure. Here, do I just maybe say...
Well, does the reflection go here, though? Well, because it's the student can write or speak about 3 positive and 3 negative impacts. That's your aim. So
maybe it doesn't even go here.
Does the reflection go here?
Really, that part of the assessment is just kind of for me to see how did we do, how did the student feel about it, and for them to kind of take ownership of some of their learning.
Right.
So it won't really play into my grade that I give them. That's for sure.
That's a good point, Chris, that that might be something else. It doesn't really belong here.
I feel like I'm being really redundant here. Should I be wording this a different way?
Well, except so the notes is really the writing, right? So the students will, is that where the discussion comes in? Students will debate using notes. Yeah, and then you have, this is what they're going to actually do.
Yeah, good catch. Okay, what do you guys think? Using their notes, students will debate about 3 positive and 3 negative impacts of World War II on the Minnesota home front.